Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coaching and Consulting Insight Series on the Success Insight Podcast. The Coaching and Consulting Insight Series introduces you to coaches and consultants that work with leaders, entrepreneurs, business owners, and professionals to create their best life and achieve and perform at their full potential. Our guest today is Dr. Laura Crawshaw. Dr. Crawshaw is the founder of the Boss Whispering Institute. Her professional expertise includes coaching abrasive leaders and training their superiors to intervene. Her target clients include executive coaches and managers of abrasive leaders. She is the author of 2 books, Taming the Abrasive Manager, How to End Unnecessary Roughness in the Workplace, which is now in its 2nd edition, and her newly published book, Grow Your Spine and Manage Abrasive Leadership Behavior, a guide for those who manage bosses who bully. Dr. Crawshaw, it is a pleasure to have you on this Coaching and Consulting Insight series on the Success Insight Podcast.
It's great to be here, Howard. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. Now, do I have permission to call you Laura?
Call me anything. Just don't call me late for din. That's all.
Okay. You say that. You've said that before. And for our listeners, I cannot tell you, one, how grateful I am to be on the other end of this virtual call with Laura, because she is someone who's had an impact on my life as a coach, because a long time ago, and I won't give away my age, I'm not worried about your age, but I had the opportunity to study with Laura when her first book came out, Taming the Abrasive Manager, and being a part of her world, and just this caring about abrasive management in the workplace, abrasive behavior. And so again, Laura, it's just a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Well, I'm really glad to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation, Howard.
Fantastic. Now, for our listeners, if you could provide a little context about your background, and then I know we're going to get into the books and into your work, but I would love for them to hear from you about what led you to this space, that in this conversation we're going to have today.
Sure. Well, I'll go way back. I'll tell you that my father was a psychiatrist and my mother was a hospital volunteer. So I grew up in a home where the commitment was to try and relieve suffering. That sort of was in my genes. And then I decided I wanted to be a psychiatrist, just like my dad, until I discovered I don't have a good memory. And there was no way in medical school I was going to be able to remember which bone connects to which bone or whatever.
I think there's a song about that, by the way, but
Well, the foot bone, the elbow, I don't know. But anyway, so I discovered I could become what was then called a psychiatric social worker, clinical social worker now, in which one becomes a psychotherapist but doesn't have a medical degree and doesn't practice medicine. So I went that path. And then I discovered that I still had the spirit of adventure. So I bought a ticket and took the ferry up to Alaska and began working the very first employee assistance program up there, and learned. I thought I was going to be helping people with their personal problems, employees who had personal problems, but it turned out so many of the problems involved their suffering at work and suffering working for an abrasive leader. So that's how I sort of discovered this world. I'd had good bosses. I knew nothing about workplace bullying. And so that was my entree into what's going on here. Why would people treat their employees badly? And I also discovered, why didn't the employers do anything about it? Those were kind of 2 questions that drove my further career path.
okay. You mentioned 2 words, suffering,
Hmm.
and the just these folks are they're in pain.
Yes.
And what does that suffering look like? I mean, how do I know, or how did you know? How could you tell that this person was in pain? What was like the telltale sign, so to speak?
Right. Well, my first encounter was we got a request for an emergency appointment. And again, I'm up in Alaska, and it was a oil field worker. And could we see him on emergency basis? I said, fine. I sat down with him and I said, how can I help you? What's going on? And he said, well, I'm really angry at my boss. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, because he he calls me names, he humiliates me, he in a whole litany of bullying behaviors. And I sat there and listened to this and I said, he said, I'm really angry. I said, how angry are you? And he said, I'm thinking of killing him. And they trained you to ask if they have a plan. So I said, well, have you thought of how you do that? And he said, yeah, my gun's out in the truck.
Mm.
And so I was very inexperienced. I was the only counselor. I trotted down the hallway to the only boss. Said, "What do we do?" He said, "Ask him if he'll give us the gun." And he did. And I'll never forget the look of relief in his eyes as he handed over the gun. And the sad story is that that wasn't the first gun we collected. So, what damage does it do? It does tremendous damage to people to be bullied in the workplace. There's some research that talks about it's even more damaging than naturally caused trauma like fire, earthquake, or whatever, because we go to work thinking, oh, I'm just going to go to work and do a good job and things will get paid, only to be mistreated. And so it can really be an assault on the identity. So targets, as they're called in the research world, they suffer depression, all sort of medical problems. There's all sorts of documentation about this. So this suffering is serious and it's unnecessary.
Okay.
No.
I'm curious, are there different types of bullying? Like I can remember back in elementary school, and it probably continued into middle school, there was physical bullying, pushing somebody up
Sure.
against the lockers. There was the humiliating type of bullying, which you just described, being called names and being embarrassed. Are there other kinds of bullies that or behaviors that would fall under this bullying moniker?
Sure. I mean, there's really an endless array. I mean, I can loss of emotional control, shouting, berating people, belittling people, over controlling, overreaction, gossiping, breaching confidentiality, maligning people's reputation. It's an endless list of ways that people can aggress against someone else. And so my definition of it, and the thing is, there are all sorts of definitions, and sometimes managers are, well, I'm not sure if this fits the legal definition of bullying, but I call it abrasive behavior,
Mhm,
which can range from mild to the most severe.
mhm.
And I call it that way that because it rubs people the wrong way. It's friction that grates on people and so destructive. And I call it, I define it as any interpersonal behavior that causes distress sufficient to disrupt organizational functioning. So we're not talking about the mildly irritating boss that we all maybe joke about. Or this is someone who causes emotional distress that is very disruptive.
Okay.
So yeah.
How long did you continue in this role as working with this EAP up in Alaska, which, by the way, had to have been fascinating. I mean, just being
Mhm.
out in nature like that. But it's a tough environment. And not only do we have to worry about weather, now we have to worry about work. What what was that evolution next as you started to collect this? I mean, I would imagine you were taking notes. Maybe there's some insights you're starting to collect, and you're going, wait, there's something here that maybe I need to think and act on, writing a book, so to speak. But how did that start to evolve for you?
How did that evolve? So those two questions, why would a boss treat their employee badly and why doesn't the organization do anything about it? Those were questions that were just embedded in me. And in the course of working in the EAP, I kind of got a reputation for working with difficult people. And so the managers would refer difficult employees they were having difficulties with. And as time went on, ultimately, we were purchased by a large insurance corporation. I was promoted to come out of Alaska to run their EAP operation. So I had my first career was sort of in the role of the counselor. And so I was fluent in the language of emotion and psychodynamics. My second step was as a corporate executive, on time and dressed to play,
Right.
and dealing with the corporate jungle there. So I was also fluent in the cold, hard, cruel realities of business. But as I traveled through these worlds, I was able to encounter more people who fell into the category of what I now call abrasive leaders, bosses who bully. And they were my greatest teachers because I had no preconceptions. And in a way, that was a blessing. I had not been bullied. So I didn't go in with any prejudices that they're all mentally disordered or morally disordered or they're this or they're that. And so they were my greatest teachers. And as I left that position ultimately to start my own, I guess you could call it consulting practice way back in 1994. I mean, we're talking history here, Howard.
Okay. Okay. Yes, we are.
And so I would sit with these individuals who had been referred because they were everybody was quitting and didn't want to work with them. And so I just started getting curious and asking. I'd interview their coworkers first, and I'd get all this data on all the things they did, the words and actions that caused all of this distress. And then I got curious and said, "What's going on?" And that coaching these individuals, really, I began to learn a lot. So that's kind of how it went
Okay.
from EAP counselor to corporate executive to having my own consulting kind of practice. Back in 1994, nobody really used the word coaching very
Right.
much, but ultimately it was. And that was how my interest developed.
Okay. So I have a question.
Yeah.
Is as you're interviewing these employees who are
Hmm.
in distress,
Yes.
and you'll provide more insight here. I know, but you collect this data, and you realize there's something going on here, and we need to do something about it.
Hmm.
Who was the person or the team, the department where you report back to? There's something going on here, folks. There's a pattern I'm seeing from the people that I'm working with.
Actually, they would contact me first.
Oh,
I would
really?
get yes, I would get calls from companies saying, "We have somebody and, everybody's quitting or they're filing complaints against her, and we need help." Sometimes it would be labeled as there's a communication problem or there's a conflict issue. But upon further questioning of that, I'll call it the employer. Sometimes it'd be the HR person or the individual superior, but I'll just use the term employer.
Mhm.
They'd say, "It's a communication problem." And I'd ask more questions. "Well, what's going on?" And then again, I'd hear about the complaints, or as I call them, the negative perceptions that he cuts people off. It's my way or the highway. He'll isolate people. He won't tolerate any, he doesn't collaborate. He just issues orders. So they would lay this out, at which point then we talk about the coaching, and that's when I'd interview the coworkers. So they really came to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I can start to identify the patterns happening, and I think right now for my listeners, in the spirit of full disclosure, I know Dr. Crawshaw. All right. I've had the pleasure back in 2009. I picked up the book, Taming the Abrasive Manager, and I was really very interested in it. And one, because I was experiencing bullying in my own workplace.
Uh-huh.
So besides being a coach, I was also working for an organization, and I was actually attended one of Dr. Crawshaw's workshops where I received training how to manage abrasive behavior in the workplace. And so I wanted to get that out of the way because I want to then begin to chat about how did this first book, Taming the Abrasive Manager, because you're collecting data, and
Right.
I see the pattern, the path that's in the breadcrumbs. When did that start to become this book? Like there's something
Sure.
here. I need to publish it. I need to do some writing. There's something here.
What happened was, as I coached more and more abrasive leaders, I found myself doing things that seemed to help. And I was like, well, what am I saying or doing that's helping, that's turning around their management style? And so in order to figure that out, I decided to go for my doctorate at Fielding Graduate University, of which you also, Howard, are a
Yep.
graduate. And my goal was my research, what I did was I studied all the notes I'd taken, and I went into in-depth study of 3 clients. And my dissertation has a really long title, Empathically Generating Empathy in Abrasive Leaders, but it really should have been titled, What Am I Doing and Why the Heck Is It Working Anyway? That's what my dissertation should have been called. And I figured it out. I figured out what I was doing. And so my dissertation work became the conceptual framework for the Boss with Spring Coaching method. And so I completed my dissertation and nobody read it. I think nobody really reads dissertations unless they're a doctoral student. So then I thought, I have to get my discoveries out into the world, and that's what the first book was. It was my journey of discovery about why abrasive leaders do what they do. And if I can give you my thumbnail answer to that, and you're welcome to ask more, the common belief is that they're all mentally disordered or morally disordered. They're all evil. They're narcissists, psychopaths. They wake up in the morning gleefully contemplating how to torment their coworkers. And to my surprise, what I discovered was, first of all, that they're unaware. The majority are unaware that they are abrasive. And how did I discover that? When I'd interview their coworkers, take the data purged of identifying information and bring it back to them, they'd go into shock. They'd say, I can't believe people think I'm trying to hurt them. I can't believe people think, and so that was, they were clueless as to how they were perceived. And then the second big discovery I made was when I'd say, well, here it says, that in meetings the feedback here says that you'll publicly humiliate people, that if somebody makes a mistake, you'll point it out in front of everybody else. And we see it's humiliating. People feel very upset about this. And my client would say, well, I don't mean to humiliate people. And I'd get curious and say, well, what is your objective? And my client would say, well, I'm just pointing out Bob's mistakes so that everybody else can learn from them. And I'd say, well, how's that working for you? As we looked at the feedback, and they said, I can't believe it. They think I'm trying to humiliate Bob. So the second thing I learned was they lack psychological insight. You and I would know what you should point out a person's mistakes in front of a group, but they lack psychological insight. The third aspect was many of them had grown up in homes where the styles were abrasive. They'd gotten yelled at all the time, or that the parents demanded near perfection. So there was all this anxiety about being perfect. So my third big discovery was that for the majority, I did encounter a few people I do qualify as psychopaths, and I can talk about that, or sociopaths, but the majority of them were clueless, lacked psychological insight, and knew no better way. And what was their motivation? They were just trying to get the job done. They'd say, I'm just trying to get the job done. That's why I yell at people. And they knew no better way. So they taught me why they behaved the way they did. And then I was able, in response, to help them kind of quickly develop some psychological insight and learn how to motivate people to fulfill their objectives without being abrasive.
Okay.
So pretty exciting journey. That's what the first book is about. That's all about my adventures in Alaska and intimidating grizzly bears, because it turns out grizzly bears aren't evil either. They're just trying to get the job done. And what's the job? The job is survival. And that's what these abrasive leaders, they were trying to survive in the workplace by any threat to their competence was responded to with this aggression, this barking, biting, growling, or whatever. And so I graduated with a major in zoology in college. So I think in terms of animal behavior a lot. And Howard, the thing is, we are animals. We're members of that good old animal kingdom. So that's my response to where did that first book come from?
Gotcha. And I have to share one, the model and the work is always, it's always on my radar. It's not, some things we learn and they get stuck in the vault somewhere and it takes forever to get out. But this work, this model, these conversations are a big part of the coaching work that many of us do, or especially I get to do it today,
Right.
when it comes to helping develop professionals in the workplace.
Right.
And I love the fight or flight, the threat, anxiety, defense mechanism, and it's just, and yet I imagine you'll
Well, I
folks,
I
if
can speak to that briefly because when it
yeah,
was like, "What the heck am I doing and why
uh-huh,
is it working anyway?"
mhm,
I would confront these people who, or not confront, but I would, encounter these people who were clueless, and so it was like, "Well, how do I clue them in to how do I give them psychological insight very quickly?"
right,
So what I would do is I would teach them one of the basic laws of nature that when any organism perceives a threat, it feels fear, or we
right,
could call it anxiety. And the two basic defense mechanisms are fight or flight. Hey, that's familiar. We've all heard it. Okay. And so what I would help them see is that when they would lose it at work and start yelling at someone, threat generates anxiety, generates defense. So they'd say, "Well, I lost it. Somebody said something and it was just so stupid, and so I yelled at him or whatever." And I'd say, "Now, would you call that fight or flight?" Well, I went into fight mode, and then I back into that and I say, "Well, what threat were you fighting against?" "Well, his stupid idea." So you experience his idea as stupid and a threat to your competence, and that's the basic anxiety that I will be rendered incompetent because of this person's stupid idea, or they're not getting the report on time, or they're making too many mistakes writing the software. So, so when you feel threatened by that, you go into fight mode. And so they develop an awareness of what they're doing. They develop this kind of observing ego. Now there's a third option we humans have, not just primitive fight and flight, but since we have these bigger brains theoretically,
right,
we have the third option, which is called working through. And that's just sitting down, putting one's cards on the table, calmly working through a problem. And so helping them move from all of this anxiety about being perceived to be competent and getting them to calm down so that they can work through the problem, so that the next time somebody comes up with a stupid idea, they can maintain some calm and talk with the person about the idea, and share why they think it might not be the best way to go and work through the problem instead of barking and biting. So that one concept, and we owe that to Freud. I mean, Freud was a biologist to begin with, and he came up with the ego and mechanisms of defense.
mhm,
So I just teach them this handy dandy trade secret of psychology. Threat generates anxiety, generates defense, fight or flight. And they start integrating that and they start seeing it in others' behavior and their own behavior. So the coaching gets really fun pretty quickly because we're dealing generally with very intelligent people. So that's in my first book too, kind of my
thank you for
discovery.
sharing that. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious now. The book came out,
Hmm.
a number of years ago. It's
Yeah.
now in its second edition. What prompted the desire? Because it's no small feat to write a book. What prompted you to say, there's a need for another book out here? I mean, Grow Your Spine and Manage Abrasive Leadership
Okay.
Behavior. I'm still amazed after all this talk about workplace bullying and abrasive
Yeah.
behavior that organizations and even managers are still unwilling to develop it and to address it, not develop it, but to
Right.
address it. And
Right.
so from your perspective, why do we need this book? Why is it so important? right
Well,
now still.
that goes to my second question that I had way back when. Why don't companies do anything about their abrasive leaders? Because that individual had the gun. He said that he had gone to human resources and reported this behavior, and they did nothing. And over the years, I mean, I'd be called in to work with abrasive leaders, and I'd say, "Well, how long has she been behaving this way?" "Oh, 12 years." Of course, I maintain my professional composure. I'd say, "Well,
Right.
have you ever talked to her about it?" "Well, we did once, but she got really defensive." Or so I'd hear when I'd ask employers, "What have you intervened? Have you intervened with the abrasive leader?" No, well, we did once, or we tried, or we sent him to a class on crucial conversation communication skills, but it didn't last. And then, so why it was just fascinating to me that they didn't really intervene. They didn't do anything. And so that the second discovery I made, which I talk about in my second book, Grow Your Spine and Manage Abrasive Leadership Behavior. Why don't they do anything about these abrasive leaders? Again, the common myth is that these employers are evil, they don't care, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what I discovered was most of them were afraid. They were afraid to sit down with that individual, and what they need to do, they need to manage conduct just the same way as performance, in that they need to sit down and say, "Look, I've either direct observations of unacceptable conduct. I've seen you do this, I've seen you do that." Or they can say, "We're getting a steady stream of negative perceptions about your interactions with others, Howard, and that cannot continue. We value you. Your technical competence is impressive. We want you here for the long haul, but you need to turn this around." So that's the first step of intervention, which is setting limits. It's saying the negative perceptions cannot continue. We need to have people feeling respected. The second part is enunciating consequences. And if it does continue, we will be forced to, and then they can fill in that blank with the most severe consequence, of course, is termination, but there are lesser consequences. We would not be able to promote you into the position that you want, or we will have to take you out of a management role or whatever. Now, what this does is intervention motivates the abrasive leader to change because their professional survival is threatened. So these people who don't see themselves as abrasive, "I'm not abrasive, everybody else is lazy, it's all their problem. I don't need to change, they need to change." Well, the employer is saying, "Well, actually, you do need to change, and we're going to offer you specialized help to do that." And then that's when they offer the specialized coaching. So, Howard, if I had a nickel for every time I describe to a manager, a supervisor of an abrasive leader, what you need to do, you need to sit down with the person and you need to do this and that. And I just finally thought, I've got to put this in the book. And the book, if I can just wave it around for a minute,
Please
it's
wave it around.
really thin. I want you to see how thin this book is. It's very short
It's a
because
good read.
yeah,
It's a
it's a
good
good read,
read.
but managers don't have a lot of time to read books. And so what it talks about growing your spine, and to intervene, you need a management backbone. And most managers do have backbones, but they need extra vertebra that I discuss in the book. They need to understand that they are guardians of the workplace, of the psychological safety of the
Mhm.
workplace, that it's their job to manage not only performance, but also conduct. And that they have a right to determine acceptable conduct. They don't need to rely on legal definitions. And they can also intervene based on what we used to call hearsay. They many times managers say, "Well, I can't do anything because I haven't observed the behavior." And I'm like, "Well, you've had 15 complaints. That's enough to sit down with the person and talk about negative perceptions, and they can't continue." You don't have to label them abrasive. You don't have to accuse them of anything. You just say, "The fact is we have a steady stream of negative perceptions." So that's why I wrote the second book.
If I am an organization, and
Yeah.
in this day and age, organizations, they're constantly churning because there's technology changes, there's financial impacts, there's bringing the right people on and COVID really
Oh,
affected
yeah.
us considerably in how the work that organizations do, what we do in the organization. I'm wondering how organizations are, or are they really embracing that this type of behavior is not acceptable in the workplace, and are human resources, because I think that might be one of the first places you go, that there's something going on here. How are they responding to address this topic so that when somebody like you, like me, one of my peers who are
Mhm.
also embrace this model, we go into an organization and begin to work? And because in my mind, if there's no consequences, this person is not going to change. If the
That
organization doesn't believe this is unacceptable, it's not going to change.
that is absolutely correct, and sometimes the organizations will contact me or other members who've trained at the Bosco Spring Institute, such as you, and say, "Well, we want you to fix this guy." And I'll say, "Well, have you sat down and talked? Have you intervened? Have you said, no, we want you to do it." Well, no, it's not gonna work unless the employer puts pressure on the individual to change. Now, your question is, are employers starting to put pressure on people who are abrasive leaders? And the answer is yes. In the olden days, particularly up in Alaska, I encountered that, we who cares if he's mistreating employees? We can always find new employees. It's not, but what we're discovering now, particularly in the era of the Me Too movement, that abrasive behavior is very costly to employers. They lose good people, they face litigation because of this, or unionization threats, etc. And abrasive behavior is disruptive. If people are all, and there's research on this, that if people are upset and distressed, they're not focused on the work, they're focused on their suffering. So, what I find is there's an increasing interest in managing a conduct, abrasive behavior. And the the message I want to get out is there's all this talk about ending workplace bullying, and we need the policies, and we need the legislation, and we need to train people. We need to train bystanders. And you know what? The only people who can stop workplace bullying are those individuals who have the authority over the abrasive leader, and that's their manager. All right, because policies won't stop it, legislation won't stop it, training won't stop it. The only thing that stops it is a manager who has the courage to say, I expect acceptable performance and acceptable conduct. And if I'm not seeing that, I'm going to manage it. I'm going to step in and intervene. And so, to me, it's kind of simple, but managers have to learn how to do that because they're going to encounter a lot of defensiveness. I'm not abrasive. You're just picking on me. You're saying this because you're sexist. Who said that? And my book includes every single question you could ever be asked if you're intervening and how to answer it. But the sad fact is, managers can stop it. Okay, they can intervene, and if the person can turn around, great, and it's so exciting. I'd say about 82% of the people who get coaching can change their management styles. But if they can't, well, then the employer knows that and says, this person isn't going to work. It's not going to work. And instead of another 12 years, they can move to terminate. Now, of course, we're always dealing with well, what about if the person's a Nobel Prize winner or a top moneymaker? How do we intervene with somebody who's so valuable to us? But what I found is, so often, if organizations do intervene, and they don't automatically have to threaten termination, the individual's clueless, is surprised that they're perceived to be abrasive, and once they're made aware of that, these are bright people. They say, "Well, tell me what to do. Tell me how to achieve my objectives without barking and biting." And if you show them, they'll do it. So, I feel very hopeful.
I appreciate that you feel helpful, very helpful,
Hopeful
hopeful,
and helpful. Yes,
hopeful
I
and
feel
helpful.
hopeful.
All right.
Yeah.
But here's a question, and
Uh-huh.
it's sticking with me right now,
Sure.
is I'm a manager in an organization.
Mhm.
how do I even know that there's a resource like this book, like this model to work with, that I have tools? Because some of the managers I work with, they're busy, and for to put something new on their plate, read this. I mean, it's hard enough to get them to read an article, let alone a very readable book, by the way. How do I get them to take an interest in this and realize, or do I just, if I ignore it, maybe it'll go away?
Right. Well, the way that would happen is that everybody listening to this podcast would read the book and post reviews, and it'd go viral,
There you go.
and we solve the problem of workplace bullying. But being a realist, I think what I've discovered is when I'm contacted by managers who are at their wits' end, and another aspect is if they do nothing, if management does nothing, management risks being perceived to be weak. And this is what I encountered so often in my interviews with coworkers, or to be tacitly condoning the behavior. Because the coworkers would say, well, they haven't done anything about Marie for years, so they must think that what Marie does is acceptable, fine, that for her to beat up on this like that. So I don't know. That's I'm hopeful about the possibility that as we come to realize that workplace bullying is not acceptable, that organizations will start looking for an efficient, quick way to address it, and that it makes sense. So that was my hope in writing the book.
Okay.
Yeah,
I am curious about one little segment of these bullies, these
sure.
abrasive managers, and it's the ones that I would call narcissistic. When I was bullied in a
Yes.
role that I was in, this individual was very much a narcissist. Nothing he did was wrong. What do we do about those individuals?
Okay. The term I prefer to narcissism is insecurity,
Okay.
because it's the same situation. This individual could never be wrong, right? They had to always be right. And that's because they were insecure. Insecure people have to defend against the threat of being perceived to be incompetent by always being right. And so what can happen is if your boss's superior had intervened and said, look, we're getting a lot of complaints, et cetera. This cannot continue. And if you cannot turn this around, if these negative perceptions persist, we will be forced to, and then state the consequence. So what I've discovered is so many of these people who are kind of labeled as having narcissistic personality disorder, in fact, they can change, and I'm not sure they do have narcissistic personality disorder, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
They behave in incredibly narcissistic ways. I'm right, my way or the highway, it's me, 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 and that's based on insecurity. But when I work with these individuals in coaching, what I discover is that they're insecure and they feel they have to be perfect. And when that's addressed, now you don't have to be perfect. People make mistakes. If I had a nickel for every time one of my clients said, you know what? Now I realize I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be perfect. And I say to them, well, welcome to the human race. Now, the issue is if that individual cannot change, the organization should not continue to employ them, because it is a responsibility of the organization to provide a physically and psychologically safe workplace where people can come to work and be treated with basic respect. And if that's not happening, then it's the employer's duty to intervene. If the person can't change, it's the employer's duty to remove that person from the workplace. Exactly as they would remove a person whose performance was unacceptable. If you're writing software that's unacceptable, that doesn't do it, and we offer you help and you still can't turn that around, well, unfortunately, aloha, goodbye.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing that. And it's from my experience and how I felt, and I still see that behavior here today as well in some of the
Yes.
conversations that I get. And I feel bad. I really do, not only for them, the people that are there are affected by that behavior,
Yes.
but also the organization that
Yes.
they may espouse one thing, but what they put into practice is something totally different.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's why I title my book "Grow Your Spine," and I
Right.
have a lot of empathy for employers who are afraid to intervene, so
Mhm.
this it's not said in a mocking way, but it actually talks about the specific vertebra and then how to conduct the intervention, and then the bottom line is, doesn't matter why people behave badly in the workplace. We could debate, is it psychological disorders, is it narcissism, is it insecure? It doesn't matter why. In a sense, that's immaterial. The reality is it's unacceptable no
Right.
matter what's causing it. And so for the employer to say, well, look, we're willing to offer you specialized coaching if you choose to accept it. That's very generous of the employer. And it's a good idea because then there's a hope they can retain the investment they have in this person. But
Mhm.
if the person refuses the coaching, if they can't turn around their abrasive leadership style, that's a sign to the employer that this is not workable.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I'd like to, that some of the time we have left is to
sure.
chat a little bit about the Boss Whispering Institute and share a little bit more about its structure, its goals, and who are the members, the folks that are going to join the institute, like myself, be a
Yeah,
part of this cadre of folks passionate about this topic. But share a little bit more about the institute.
sure. So the Boss Whispering Institute is our mission is to relieve suffering in the workplace caused by abrasive leaders through research and practice. So we do two things. One is we support research into abrasive leaders, and there's some exciting work that's being done. I think of one member, Dr. Lori Tucker, who did research on people who had gone through the process of an intervention and then turning around their management style and how shocking it was for them to learn that they were perceived to be abrasive. So really that's now supported in research. The practice is, so I developed this method for coaching abrasive leaders and I wanted to share it with others. And so that was why I'm not good at dates, but I think maybe over 10 or 15 years ago, I formed the Institute. And I started by doing the 4-day training in person in different parts of the world. And then I got a little tired, and people got tired of hearing me talk for 4 days straight. And so I put the course online. So now it's a self-paced online course. And so the Boss Whispering Institute is composed of special coaching practitioners who want to work in this specialty practice, which is very rewarding to do this work. How do they become members? They sign up for the course and then they become lifetime members. No further dues necessary. You can attest
Hallelujah.
to
I
that,
love that.
Howard.
What a deal.
And we have quarterly meetings where we talk about different issues that come up, and I'm so proud we have almost 300 members worldwide now. And these individuals, they're relieving suffering, they're publishing articles, they're helping the world understand there's a way to intervene, there's a way to address the problem of workplace bullying. So it's very rewarding.
Fantastic. And I know we're gonna ask you to share the website of the Boss Whispering Institute. And
Yeah.
before we get there, though, I'm curious as you kind of look back on your career and the great work that you're doing and will continue to do, what has been one of your some of your aha moments? Like, wow, this is unbelievable.
That the method actually worked was one big aha moment that people very quickly, I mean, they're not on the couch for 3 years. Yeah, it's usually like 8 to 10 sessions where they get it. They understand that they're perceived to be abrasive. They understand now what they do and say that causes that, and they're now able to independently generate strategies to achieve their objectives without behaving abrasively. And that they love what they learn, that they enjoy the coaching, even though initially they're very suspicious. I had one client who said, "Are you trying to turn me into Mr. Cupcake?" And my response is, I said, "Look, I'm trying to make you more powerful than you are today because right now everybody's focused on your behavior, not on your objectives. Let's change that." So the method works. That was one big surprise to me that I could enunciate, that I figured out how to enunciate the method and train it. And then another big surprise was it worked when other people did it. It wasn't just the magic of Laura. It was like other coaching practitioners were doing wonderful work by virtue of the principles in the training. So that's all been really rewarding. And then I think the third aspect is my aha moment was all of this energy that's put into the policies and the management trainings and the all this, it all boils down to a management issue of managing conduct and having the courage to do that. So that was another big aha for me.
I
I
love it.
wonder if I'm out of ahas for the rest of my life. What do you think, Howard?
I think there's always some ahas around the corner. And it's funny in conversations when you're chatting, even with the recipient of the abrasive behavior
Yeah,
and
the target, as we
the
call them. Yeah,
target.
yeah.
I need to go back through your
No,
online
no,
training,
that's
by the
fine.
way.
Yeah.
But the recipient perhaps has been told or felt that they needed to fix something. And we learn as coaches, well, yeah, thank you. That. I'm glad you shared that with me. But if I can, I'd like to ask you some questions to get a better understanding. And then you realize there's a whole other element going on here. Those aha moments for me, and even
Mhm,
for the client that I'm
mhm,
working with,
mhm.
is it's I love that because that means they're suddenly realizing, wait a minute, I'm not broken. Maybe I need to develop, but I'm
Yeah.
not broken. And
Yes.
then it opens up a whole other conversation.
Yes. I think I've had clients who just thank me profusely for helping them see their work world a different way.
Yeah.
And when managers read the book or listen to when I was telling them how to intervene, and they'd say, it's as if you knew exactly what I was up against,
Mm.
exactly what I was dealing with, all the denial, all the whatever. And this approach really helped me. It's one of the hardest things I did the first time I did it was sit down with an abrasive leader and intervene. But yeah, the being able to do that, isn't it great? Isn't it great to be a coach, Howard? It's great.
It truly is. It truly is.
Yeah.
Best decision I ever made
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
was to say, I think I need to do something else in my career.
Yes, good,
So
good.
one more quick question. If
Mhm,
now we have this wonderful book, the newest one, Grow Your Spine and Manage
mhm,
Abrasive Leadership Behavior.
mhm,
We definitely are going to have the backlinks to it as well as to your first book, Taming the Abrasive Manager, on our show notes. But if you'd like to leave kind of an insight to our audience that to share, it could be another of the book. Well, we know the book, but the
mhm.
article, a quote. Is there something that has resonated for you that you would like to share with our audience as your insight to go?
My insight to go is stay curious. I wouldn't have learned everything I learned about these individuals if I assumed I knew everything. I knew nothing. And when I begin the coaching, I know nothing about that person. And so to stay curious, and I think that's one of the signs of really great coaches, instead of rushing into fix and lecture and control their clients, they just get curious and they listen. And people want to be listened to, and that develops empathy. I think that really helps us understand, get into the other person's shoes. So that's key for me, always has been.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Now, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
www dot bosswhispering.com. That's yeah, www.bosswhispering.com. That's the home of the Boss Whispering Institute. And yeah, that's the place.
Fantastic. And we will definitely have backlinks to it on our show notes. Laura, it has been a pleasure to have you on the Coaching and Consulting Insight series on the Success Insight podcast. For my listeners, as I started off this episode, I was flubbing the intro, and I think I was just a little bit nervous because, I mean, Laura and her work and just her friendship means so much to me. And it was funny. I was having a conversation with a client and what we were chatting about, and then there's an email about Laura and her new book, and it's like, oh my God, talk about something cosmic going on.
Cosmic.
And I'm so grateful, Laura, that you were open to being on this podcast. I don't think I was doing podcasts when you and I first met.
No.
Well, I know I wasn't, but
Yeah.
just being able to share this platform with you, and also to be able to share your model and your passion and these two wonderful books, especially this new one, with our audience, and just to kind of see where it ends up. If through this conversation we can help an organization, a manager, then something, we've done our job, and I think that's
Right.
just wonderful. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Howard, for a great conversation. One of the great things in life are great conversations. And of course, I could talk about this forever. So thanks for
I,
giving me an opportunity.
I love it, and again, I'm so grateful, and it's actually reminded me that I need to perhaps be a little bit more attentive and intentional about the activities of the Institute, because this topic is just very near and dear to my heart, and
Yeah.
it's a reminder that even as a coach, I need to continue to develop myself. So again, thank you for that. Listen, stay on the line. We're going to do a quick close, and you and I can have a final chat. Okay?
Okay.
Great. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Dr. Laura Crawshaw, founder of the Boss Whispering Institute, and her two books, Taming the Abrasive Manager, How to End Unnecessary Roughness in the Workplace, how this book came about, and her journey from the wilds of Alaska, and uh, really doing some nature research and understanding bear behavior. I didn't get a chance to share with Laura. I have a friend who's actually studying bears right now. I believe it's up in the Northwest, somewhere in the Northwest, but she's writing a book and a documentary. I should probably put the two of them together. And so, Chris Milgate, if you listen to this episode, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Crawshaw. But and also her new book, Grow Your Spine and Manage Abrasive Leadership Behavior, a guide for those who manage bosses who bully. This is such an important topic, and it continues to be, because the instances of this behavior in the workplace, it's untenable. Organizations have to deal with this. Managers need to learn how to work through the uncomfortable nature of having these conversations. And through Laura's model and just practice, you can take a stand on abrasive behavior in the workplace and abrasive leadership behavior. Now, we do want you to go check out the books. We're going to provide the backlinks in our show notes. And if you are interested in this topic of managing abrasive behavior, I want to encourage you to visit the Boss Whispering Institute's website at bosswhispering.com. There you can learn not only about the research, the online training, as well as the more on this very important topic. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode and are really interested in kind of going forward, learning a little bit more. And as Laura said, to be curious, because that's the best part about the coaching profession, is we get to be curious. And so if you enjoyed this episode, you can find us on successinsightpodcast.com. That's our website. We're also on Facebook and on LinkedIn on our Success Insight Podcast pages. We are on all of the podcast directories. So wherever you listen to your podcast, just search for Success Insight Podcast and you will find us. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there and have a phenomenal day. And we will see you on a future episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.